So, as Andy opened up, The Haunting in Venice is the third film in the Hercule Poirot series. IMDb's got the summary. In post-World War II Venice, Hercule Poirot, world-renowned detective, now retired and living in his own exile, reluctantly attends a seance. But when one of the guests is murdered, it's up to the former detective to once again uncover the killer. Third film in the series, directed by and starring Kenneth Branagh as our titular Hercule Poirot, who is seemingly just always looking forward to turning out another one of these. After Andy and I saw Death in the Nile, we really thought,
these.
yeah, there's not going to be any more. Like he's passionate and he turns out a great performance in it. But they're not going to do another one. But they did. And I think the reason Haunting in Venice has been made is twofold. And number one, smaller budget, right? From $90 million on Nile to $60 million here, cut a third off the top of that. Number two, the lean on horror. Early trailers for Haunting in Venice didn't even indicate at all that it was a Hercule Poirot mystery. They don't say his name. They don't talk about it. Whereas early trailers for Nile very much were trying to tie into the Murder on the Orient Express crowd, right? Like, come back and see another Agatha Christie mystery. The posters for this featured very little like Agatha Christie branding. You didn't really see that it was a Poirot mystery. Like, you notice how Glass Onion, Rian Johnson's second Knives Out film, said Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery at the bottom? None of this for A Haunting in Venice. None of that for Death in the Nile. They want this to kind of stand apart as its own thing. And by leaning into the horror, right, and putting it out in October and kind of chasing the Nun 2 audience, but the Blumhouse crowd, I think maybe 20th Century Fox, Disney was hoping that this would kind of pull people in. And it seems like it, for the most part, has. Not quite the all-star cast, I should say, that the other movies have either. Along with the smaller budget, I would say the cast has downsized a little bit. You've got Branagh as Hercule Poirot. Michelle Yeoh, excitingly, as Mrs. Reynolds, our mysterious medium, I'm going to say, seance. Jamie Dornan as a father in the film. Tina Fey as an avid writer, friend of Poirot. And one other, Kelly Riley as Rowena Drake, I wanted to mention as the anguished mother who's trying to speak to her daughter from beyond the grave, invites Mrs. Reynolds over for the seance. But before we get into the plot, Andy, what'd you think?
So I started off very hopeful about this. Like I thought the first act was really strong. We meet our very interesting cast of characters. We meet a semi-retired Poirot. Tina Fey shows up to get him back in the game, and there's a lot of kind of creepiness, and they're filming on location. Like, the film looks great because they don't have to do a ton of CGI. They're in Venice, they're in an actual palazzo, in these rooms. It looks great. It's spooky. It's a little creepy, and then the second act gets here, and it just grinds to a halt. It gets so slow, and you have this is usually where things get more exciting in these movies, because this is where everyone gets interrogated, and you get to start to see who has a motive or would have wanted them dead, or it's supposed to be the more exciting part of the film, and it just, like, these interrogations take forever. There's lots of pauses and breaks, and it just dragged. The middle of it got really boring for me. But I did love how it looked. I did like the cast. I just think the script got a little slow in the middle. But it looks great. And it looks better than the other two films, I think.
Yeah, I think as an episodic feature, like Haunting in Venice does a really good job of kind of standing on its own. You do not have to have seen the previous films. You could totally go see this as a one-off. You may not even know that it's connected to the other two. I'm sure there's some theater goers who walk into the theater like, oh, I didn't know this was related. But there's no reference to Nile. There's no reference to Express, really. You just get Poirot as this, retired but world-renowned detective. Like, there's people lining up outside of his palazzo in Venice to talk to him. And he's got this new bodyguard who's like, back off, man. Like, don't talk to my guy. He's retired. He's heard every mystery in the world. He doesn't want to do it, right? And then Tina Fey shows up as this, like, charming film set in 1947, I should say, is this charming, like, late 40s writer who's like, I got a scoop, Poirot, and you're gonna help me get it. Just do me a solid from your old pal who helped make you famous by writing about you. and she invites him to the seance. They go to this like beautiful, like torn down palazzo. They say it like 12 times. That's why I keep saying it. Where they visit the not the Reynolds family, the Drake family. Yes, whose daughter tragically became ill and felt like she was hearing demons and spirits in their haunted palazzo, and ended up tragically committing suicide. Miss Reynolds, the world-renowned medium, comes out to summon her a little bit and have a kind of thing. And it's during this process where Poirot says, like, I think you're full of it. Let me be clear. I've lived a whole life solving murders. You're not. There's nothing to this. But then he starts experiencing things in the place, right? The haunting of the title, and that's when he starts to question whether or not like it's real or he's losing it, and that creates, I think, an interesting aspect of these movies that the other two haven't had, right? Like, I think the other two films are much more grounded. The bit of spiritualism here, combined with, I should say, really tremendous lighting, and tons of shadows and darkness, like tons of shots with like odd framing and like something over in the corner you can just kind of see, and like 5 too many little jump scares for sure, creates a movie that like feels really tonally different from the other two and leaves you not having to have seen any of the others to know what goes on. Like, so like kudos to Branagh, like for crafting like a third adventure that feels completely on its own. I didn't expect that. I was a little skeptical going in. I can say confidently like this one stands apart in a good way.
Yeah, I think this film is really well made, and you're absolutely right. Like, it's a dark and stormy night. Like, it's pouring outside. The canals of Venice are flooding. There's lightning and thunder, and winds blowing. Wind blows the window open. That kind of stuff. It does a good job of kind of setting atmosphere, and it's definitely borrowing from the horror genre, maybe a little bit too much, because there's a number of cheap jump scares, some of which work, most of which don't really, if you've ever seen a horror movie in your life. I wanted to talk about Tina Fey's character. I haven't seen Tina Fey in a movie in a long time, and I have a hard time seeing Tina Fey just not be Tina Fey as
me too. She's always doing an SNL bit, right? Like, I can never really take her seriously.
Yeah, and her accent is kind of all over the place. Sometimes she just sounds like Tina Fey, which sounds too modern for this movie, and other times it sounds like she's trying to kind of maybe put on a transatlantic accent or an accent of that period, but she never sticks with it, and I'm just never really convinced of her character. The costume looks fine, but she just doesn't fit the period the way that Branagh does as Poirot. Like, he loves playing this role. He's so good at it.
Yeah, it's true. Like, and that stood out in Nile. I remember a couple of monologues he's got in there where he like really is. I mean, he's doing it like Shakespeare. Like, he goes all the way for it. And I think like Faye is a result of like the limited casting availability. It's so funny to see the budgets tumble in these films and like see the cast follow them. The first film's got like Johnny Depp and that exciting new girl that was in Star Wars that just came out, Daisy Ridley, and like I think Dame Judi Dench or Helen Mirren is in that movie, right? The second film's like a little smaller, but yeah, like Josh Gad is in it, right? Like, and the second film's like a little smaller. Some of the back cast isn't that important, isn't that big, but you still get like Gal Gadot, hot off the set of Wonder Woman, and Armie Hammer, like moments before he became a cannibal. And like you still had like some like Emma Mackey, right? Like, who's been in some stuff, and it was just up for Lois Lane. Like, she was one of the exciting front runners. This movie has rolled it all the way back, right? We've got like 3 or 4 decent people on the cast, Michelle Yeoh and Tina Fey, who are both, good for sure. Michelle Yeoh just won an Oscar, but like I'm not sure that was happening while they were shooting this feature. Jamie Dornan coming off like 50 Shades of Grey, and a few other things, of course. Kelly Riley, who I've seen in a bunch of things, but I can never really place like one in particular. All solid, and then everybody else I don't know. Those are the only people I know. Oh, I should say the son of the Drake family in this film. The son is Jude Hill, who played Buddy in Belfast, Branagh's last big good movie. Yes, right. He put that out with same year as Death in the Nile. Yeah, he's the Belfast kid. So like I'm glad Branagh's pulling for him at least. He's back in here. I do think there's some limits in performances. But I think the performances in the second half, like you said, the second act are where that comes out the most. Like any good whodunit, right? Like your first act is introduce everybody, bring everybody in, and then the crime happens, right? Something happens to kick off the investigation. Act 2, investigation. You get out the detective's notebook. You start asking who was in the mansion with the candlestick at 12 o'clock, whatever. You work your way through your interviews. Act 3, resolution. Like maybe some kind of twist at the end of Act 2 to really make it exciting, but Act 3, like, who done it? That's what you want to find out. And it feels like this movie is still aimed firmly at the audience that would like that. It's very traditional, right? There's some of those interviews where like a character will start crying. Actually, many of them. One more thing. A lot of those interviews are like extreme close up. Like you'll see a character like from chin up to like the mid forehead, and half of them have tears in their eyes. I swear Branagh told every one of them, get a good cry going before we do your monologue. You know what I mean? And by the time you're watching like the fifth one, you realize they all start to look the same. Where the film stands apart visually I realized I forgot about that till you said, Andy, and I was like, oh yeah. But where the film stands apart visually is its scenery. And it's landscapes and lighting, and how practical it is. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I've been talking too much. Andy, where are you at?
So, yeah, like I said, the investigation, which is usually the more interesting part of the film, it was definitely that way in Death on the Nile, where you especially got kind of dug into more of the backstory. It just didn't have that here, and it's a lot of just like people talking in rooms, long extended dramatic monologues of varying intensity. The one that Jamie Dornan does as he's a doctor suffering from kind of post World War II PTSD, and like he talks about liberating a concentration camp in Bergen-Belsen, and he has a very powerful monologue. But then again, you get it 5 other times from other people, and it's just so slow, and that's intercut with Poirot also kind of seemingly having visions or thinking he's seen apparitions or kind of things like that. And it just really drags down this middle act. It is a fun piece, but I think if it just were like 15 minutes shorter, if it would have been a hot 90 minutes, I think we would have got there. But man, that second act just drags. I was with a friend, and they were like, if I didn't know that you had to watch this whole thing for your show, I would have left.
Oh my God. Okay, I don't think it's walkout worthy, but I respect that opinion. Yeah, no, the movie tries to spice it up, like, because it falls into those rails and starts to feel real, samey. It changes it up by a few ways. Yeah, one, giving our characters interesting dimension, like Jamie Dornan's doctor. Number 2, lots of little odd happenings around the mansion to keep the haunting aspect kind of going, which is decent stuff. Poirot starts to hear stuff, and you're sitting in your chair trying to put the mystery together and wondering, okay, do other people hear that? Is this a bit? Where could that be coming from? Admittedly, I think it may go too far. I was trying to solve it as you go, like you do in any good whodunit. And I was like, maybe there's like mold in this watery Venice house or something, and they're all inhaling mold spores and seeing visions. Like I could not put it together. Yeah, and maybe I'm not the world's greatest detective. I don't know if anybody can put this one together by the time it gets to the end, but relatively satisfying, I think. I want to talk about why this movie looks so much different from Nile. Death on the Nile, like Murder on the Orient Express, is functionally a vehicle movie. I know it's a whodunit, but like both films take place basically in a vehicle. Nile spends more time out of it, but Murder on the Orient Express is, of course, on a train. Death on the Nile is in this large, like, private ferry they have. And Nile really suffered for me because so much of it is green screen. Like, they had a practical set of the boat, I think, but it was just on a green screen set, like soundstage. And then they just, put everything in post. They'd light it the best they could and then fill in the landscape later in editing. And it comes off looking real phony a lot. And it's part of the reason is because it's so sunny. It has to be sunny, right? They're in Egypt, like in the middle of the summer. Like the sun is pounding on every aspect of that boat. And it makes it like a real challenge, at least for me, to try to get into, because like every time you see an exterior shot of the boat, it's like the fakest thing you've ever seen in your life. Looks like a photo out of a highlights magazine. But This movie, like, I think maybe twice, like 2 or 3 times, I saw noticeable green screen footage. Otherwise, everything's practical. And I do think a lot of it's still soundstage, but they built sets and they lit them effectively, like using darkness in the same way Nile uses sunlight. It is dark all the time. It's like Branagh got off the set of Nile and was like, never again am I shooting a movie with this much sunlight, because you could see everything and it makes bad CGI worse. This movie goes the exact opposite way. It's literally cheaper and it's literally better for it. It's crazy to me this movie was $30 million less. Like, you'd never know looking at it, because it looks like it's better put together than the previous feature. So that's worth mentioning.
There are such terrible scenes in Death on the Nile when they're like looking up at the pyramids, because there's a scene where one of the characters is like painting on one of the Great Pyramids of Giza, and he's obviously not there. Because first of all, I don't think the geography works that way. Also, there's a lot of city buildings around the pyramids now, and so it's just like the most fake Egypt pyramid looking thing you've ever seen. So A Haunting in Venice works so much better just by using a lot more practical sets.
Yeah, it really does. Like, it's worth mentioning. And overall, like, I think, for me, the lacing of Poirot kind of losing his mind, maybe. Whether or not there are actually spirits at this evil haunted orphanage, haunted house they're in. That stuff, I think, adds a layer to it that makes it just a bit more engaging than Nile. Because Nile really falls in that trap in Act 2. It keeps exciting by having a character try to escape the boat, and so we can't find him. You got to find that stuff's fine. But this has a little bit more something to it. Which again, like, is surprising. I was skeptical going in. I thought Nile was going to be good, and I came out of it like, Nile's not good. This, I was like, well, this will probably be like Nile. I think it comes out better, which is very surprising. But it shows Branagh's still got it, definitely, and he cares a lot about this character. Like, clearly he cares. Clearly he cares to do this a third time, and to shoot it so different than the other two, and like chase something that's a little bit more unique. Maybe even spend a little time gestating on the nature of life and death, right, and whether or not there's an afterlife. Like, that's all uniquely interesting, and I'm really pleased to say that's all here. And despite my expectations, Haunting in Venice, better than I thought. One more mention for the soundtrack. I didn't know if, Andy, you had any thoughts on that, but I'm probably about ready for reviews. I don't know. Where you at?
Score by Oscar-winning composer Hilda Gudnadottir, who won the Oscar for the score of Joker.
What a name.
So, yeah, she returns for this good score as well.
It's funny. I had moments when I liked the score. It's long drone stuff, and then there's one fight sequence in the middle of the movie where it's so laughably bad. I was like, what intern did they get to score this scene? Like, it doesn't work at all. The audio's over it. They're like struggling. I'm gonna have to rewatch it, I guess, with that in mind, because by the end of the movie, overall, I was like, score's pretty good. And I saw the name in the credits, and I was like, oh my god, Oscar-winning composer for Joker. Yeah, turning out the Death on the Nile score. Certainly didn't skimp over there. Andy, would you recommend Death on the Nile?
I would, but I would say save it for streaming.
What would you? Would you recommend Haunting in Venice? Jesus. Would you recommend Haunting in Venice?
I would say save it for streaming. It is a fun little movie. It's much better than Death on the Nile. It is a little creepy. It's got a lot of horror influence. It's an interesting mystery. It's much more kind of a middle of the road kind of popcorn flick. It does really drag in the second act. I think it could tighten up the script a lot better. The cast is really diverse and interesting. Tina Fey is a little bit difficult to see as this like 1940s famous writer, but she does the best she can. Kenneth Branagh is great and is just loving playing Hercule Poirot. So a fun time, but I would say save it for streaming.
I'm in the same boat. I think Venice is not bad. I think it's better than Nile. I actually think, if you're interested, it might be worth going to see in theaters. It's not particularly cinematic, but there's decent work in here. Some creative stuff, a couple of really clever handheld shots, and one great shot in particular, actually, I forgot about this, where Poirot feels like he's seeing things, and they lock a camera on his body facing his head. It's great. It's the Rec Room for a Dream shot, right? Like, I love it. It's nice to see Branagh flexing out to something new. It's nice to see him exploring something different, playing with light and color. Not bad. I'm really surprised. I'm really surprised. Death in the Nile. Death in the Nile. Good Lord, Haunting in Venice is better than I thought it would be. I don't want to butcher the name again, so I'm going to move off of it. Andy, we got to talk about some things that are coming out soon. What do we call this segment?
It's time for the trailer park.